Welcome to Dear Watchers, an omniversal comic book podcast where we do a deep dive into the multiverse.
We are traveling with you through the stories and the worlds that make up an omniverse of fictional realities we all love. And your watchers, I don't know, I was going to say of the dark night, but just watchers of the night on this journey, that sounds a little creepy, are me, Guido.
And Rob Claw? Dark Rob? Either one. And speaking of darkness, I think there's someone lurking in the shadows. Is it an assassin? I don't know. He's wearing an eye patch. No. It's frequent guest and friend of the show, Ethan of Make Mine Amalgam. Not Ethan Make Mine Amalgam. Hello, Ethan.
Hello. Or, again, since we're doing an amalgam issue, Uatu the Guardian.
Yes, there you go. That's true. That would have been the better way to go with this intro. Well, thank you, Ethan, for joining us, Uatu the Guardian. And listeners, if you are not familiar, if you're perhaps joining us newly, you can hear Ethan back on episodes 19, 25, 32, 36, and 63. And we'll put links in the show notes because
that's a lot of episodes.
It is, and it's worth going to revisit all of them.
Yes. Well, welcome again, Ethan, and thank you. And Guido, what is up with us in our little section of the multiverse?
Well, we have something exciting coming in December. It sort of just happened, and it has to do with art. And if you like art and weird comic things, and maybe if you like mashups a bit, Ethan, then this is going to be something really fun that we have been working on, and we'll have a lot more to share in December. And don't forget to check out last week's episode if you skipped it. It was really huge for us. It was a really exciting interview, and it was so exciting that we have an unabridged version for our coffee patrons to listen to, but the main feed version is also really important for all comic fans, Marvel fans, continuity fans, etc. So listen to that last episode. Watch for some announcements in the coming weeks about really fun stuff we have to share. And then social media, just a reminder, as the social media world changes,
Crumbles,
you can check us out.
Whatever word you want to say.
You can check us out many places, including like YouTube. We started putting our episodes on YouTube and trying to do some clips on there. And we joined Hive, and, we're everywhere and always as Dear Watchers. Luckily, that's not something that other people are stealing. And please don't get any ideas and start stealing it on new platforms from us. Let us have it. But we're always Dear Watchers.
Oh, this YouTube. I guess I got to check this out. I haven't heard about this. The kids must be into it with the YouTube and the TikToks. Okay. So, and also, please take a moment when this episode is over to do two things. So, one, tell a friend to listen to us. So, if you have a friend, maybe your local comic book shop, let them know that we are out there in the multiverse. And two, leave us a review on Apple. And if you don't use Apple Podcasts, leave us a review wherever. But if you use Apple Podcasts, that is the one that's really helps with findability. If that is
if you
phrase.
Don't use it, you can also go in and still.
Oh, that's
rate.
true. That's true. You can still rate. Yes.
We're
please.
like those shady Amazon reviewers, where like people are clearly being paid or something to go in and review, but we're not paying anyone. So
No, exactly. So we're a little less shady. And if you are joining us for the first time, we have three sections of the show: origins of the story, what inspired this other reality; exploring multiversity, we dive deeper into our alternate universe; and pondering possibilities, we examine the impact and what's followed or coming in the future. And with that, dear watchers, let's head to Gotham City and welcome to episode 73. Let's check out what's happening in the Omniverse with today's alternate universe. And today, our question is, what if Kevin Conroy, the best Batman there is, was amalgamated with Wolverine in an animated series? What a question.
I love that question. I love it. And this is all thanks to Ethan, who suggested this whole episode. But giving a little background on where this question came from, this is Earth 9602, the Amalgam Universe. The book that we looked at was during Wave 2, the 97 wave of books. You can hear us cover other amalgams on episodes 36, 44, and 55. So we give a lot more background than we're going to today. But for those not familiar, which I think all of us would probably say shame, but for those not familiar...
Let me get the bell, the shame bell.
Exactly.
Ding, ding.
Amalgam was a mashup of Marvel and DC spinning out of a Marvel versus DC series, although it came back in a second wave, which was unprompted by a series, and that's where this came from today. This is in the 90s. And again, Ethan suggested this episode based on, sadly, the untimely passing of Kevin Conroy, who died in early November after playing Batman for 30 years. And as we go through, Ethan can share more about the reason we watched and read what we did, because they were from his suggestions. But Ethan, do you want to say anything about why you thought about this episode with Kevin's passing?
Well, I thought about doing a Dark Claw episode specifically because this is the only Amalgam book that's based off of a cartoon or a cartoon tie-in comic. They never made a Super Soldier animated comic, and Superman had a book. So I thought, well, what perfect way to commemorate Kevin Conroy and put my own little spin on it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it gives us the chance to talk about him and his impact too. So thank
You're
you.
welcome. Thank you
for it.
Yeah, and we've covered our backgrounds on Amalgam in those other episodes that Guido referenced. So if you want to hear more about our backgrounds with Amalgam as well as the actual history of Amalgam Comics, go and check out those episodes. But let's talk about our history with Batman the Animated Series, because that's another big thing that we're going to be talking about today. So Ethan, why don't you kick us off? What's your background with Batman the Animated Series?
I think when I was a kid, it was one of my first Batman shows I watched. And only recently I watched a couple more episodes. One, because we're trying to watch a lot of Christmas stuff at my house. So we watched the Christmas with the Joker episode shortly after Kevin's passing. And then for this episode, I almost watched the first episode, but then I thought about it. Let's see how we can connect it even more, and so I watched this particular episode recently.
So when you were little, did you watch a lot of it? Like, do you think you've seen a lot of the show,
pieces,
or you didn't watch too much?
Like when it was in syndication. So probably not like episode by episode, because I was I was born in 94. So I was probably watching some like reruns on Cartoon Network when that was starting to end, and they started to stop doing that. So I remember like Christmas with the Joker, I definitely saw on a VHS that I got from Blockbuster. Yeah, that's that's dating. That's dating. If VHS doesn't date it enough. And then so yeah, I saw like a couple episodes here and there, and then this one that we watched for the episode, I don't think I'd ever seen it. I just like looked. I just was looking up episodes that would relate, and boy, did it!
Yeah. Well, speaking of dating ourselves, Guido and I watched this in its original run on television, I think. So, Guido, what was your background with Batman the Animated Series?
Yeah, well, considering that I was just about a teenager when it started, I'm ahead of all of you. So I loved the show. I mean, it debuted with X-Men the Animated Series, which was my favorite, being an X-Men person. But this show, and I'll get more into what I think about the quality of the show when we get to the episode. But spoiler alert on my opinion, the show is extraordinary and amazing. And so I loved it as a kid, even though I was not super into Batman. It completely pulled me in, and I watched it every day for years and years and years. And then, when it got releases on DVD and Blu-ray, I always got those sets because it's so easy to turn on and enjoy and watch. And so I've watched them all a few times, and so I know the show really well. Some of the later seasons I don't know quite as well when they start to play with the format, but that's just from not having seen them 8 times. I've only seen them, 3 times or something like that. So I love this show. I know the show well, and it is my Batman for sure. This is my Batman. This is the template of Batman for me, and I think for a lot of people.
And it's neat that
no, go ahead.
It was neat that you say that what was it about? Okay. He's your Batman, and you weren't really into Batman and you watched it. For me, I think that was one of my first exposures. Because I was like watching a lot of cartoons, and that got me into a lot of the comics.
Yeah, it's so iconic, more than I think people even realize, although I think a good number of people realize it. But Rob, you're somewhere in the middle of Ethan's and my age.
I was going to say, speaking of age, I feel like I was right in the sweet spot more than you, Guido, for this series, because I was definitely actually watching it on Saturday morning as a younger kid. And yeah, I love this series. I watched it every weekend. Even more so than the series as a whole, I was a huge fan of the feature-length film Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which I had also, speaking of VHS, had that on VHS, watched that all the time. Probably watched that more than I watched any of the live-action Batman movies that were of that first 4 movies there. But yeah, I just love this series. And one thing I love about this series is it always had also a lot of these more grotesque villains, these kind of minor characters, and the whole series, and we can talk about this more, but I was a big Dick Tracy fan too of the Warren Beatty movie, and there's a big strong Dick Tracy vibe from the Danny Elfman opening theme, and he did the music for Dick Tracy, but that 50s thing, and then the kind of grotesque villain. So I loved Ventriloquist in Scarface, and I forget her name, but there's like the Annabelle kind of character where she never
Baby doll.
Annabelle means Baby Jane, Baby doll, where she never grows up and she never looks older, but she's actually like a middle-aged person but looks like a little kid, and it's like, oh, that's so creepy, and having it on Saturday morning television is just so cool. And I think this episode also that we're going to be talking about today taps into a lot of that feeling of something that existed before most people who were watching this show were even born, this kind of aesthetic, and yet it's kind of introducing it through this new lens to another generation, which is pretty amazing.
That's what's so cool about it is it felt like, and it still feels like, even as an adult, very adult. It feels like you're watching something you shouldn't be watching, but not in a way that feels gross or dirty or exploitative. But there's something dark about the show, and it's not heavy, though. Like, it's still a kid's cartoon, and it still has that action adventure fun. But yeah, the villains and the tone and the plots, even, I mean, it feels a little more adult. I have to say, X-Men the Animated Series is probably my favorite because of my love of it, but I think Batman is a better executed show. I think it's really extraordinary.
Yeah, so, I actually tweeted recently that I feel a sense of validation that it says TV PG on HBO Max.
Yeah.
But I started with, exactly. I'm 28 and should be able to watch whatever I want. But I still feel a sense of validation.
Yeah, but I think you're right, Guido. I think both of those shows, though, they are great companion pieces because one dealt with these kind of political stories and also these elongated story arcs. And Batman only did kind of 2-part episodes. They didn't do like those super long arcs, but had that kind of darkness in it that the X-Men the Animated Series didn't in other ways. So they're really, I think, go hand in hand, and also they like visually contrast so much the brightness of those kind of Jim Lee X-Men costumes. And then one thing I know what they did with Batman the Animated Series is I believe they animated it over black, So they started with like a
Right,
black
right.
page, and then they animated on top of that. So it gives it that such a unique look that you really don't see from any other animated series.
No, truly amazing. And we really, if people aren't familiar with the history of the two shows, both debuting on Fox, really importantly, it's Margaret Lesh. Margaret Lesh was the executive who created the Fox Kids programming block that we know and love, and that these two iconic, forever cemented classic shows happened in. So it's very cool to learn a little bit about the business side and how they developed these and where they came from. And so I strongly recommend people get into that.
Get the TV ready, our Saturday morning cereal. Well, we have to adjust the rabbit ears to make sure everything's coming in clearly, and then we'll journey into origins of the story.
Right now on this very show, you're going to get the answer to all your questions. Our amazing story begins a few years ago.
So this
I really
is a
should
good
have loaded some of the score from Batman animated series on the soundboard.
Everyone can hear it in their head, though. Definitely, you can read these issues listening to it like we did, actually. So yeah, and this is really just a good excuse to talk even more about Batman in the animated series, because the first thing we're going to be discussing is just that, an episode from November 1992 entitled "Off Balance."
And so this is the 44th episode of the series, and it is written by Len Wein, the comic book writer, directed by Kevin Altieri, produced by Alan Burnett, Eric Radomski, and Bruce Timm. And so, Ethan, why this episode?
I chose this episode along with the Batman issue that we're going to discuss later, because you're going to see a theme of Talia not just being in the episode, but the relationship between Talia and Batman.
Yeah, and I think this is her first appearance on the TV show,
yes,
right?
And I believe
this felt like an introduction.
And I believe it's her first appearance in that version of the comic as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. This so I loved rewatching this. This was not an episode I remembered super well, but again, in terms of what I was saying about the adult thing, the Talia Batman romance thing is one of those examples where it felt like you were watching something very adult, because they have somehow these drawn on the screen characters have a lot of chemistry, and you can sort of feel the chemistry between them in the episode. And then, it's just a fun, typical episode outside of that, a good way of deepening the Ra's al Ghul lore in the animated series. So I loved rewatching it. What did you both think?
I loved it. I don't think I had ever seen that episode before. So I had actually Googled around to see, and I just ended up lucking out that all of these ended up being as connected as they were. But I'm about to make just as groundbreaking a statement as I did with my Nick Fury episode that Jack Kirby's art is amazing. But it's very cinematic.
Yeah. Even the pacing, which is, I think, obviously we can picture the opening theme, and that's very cinematic, but there's something about the story pacing, and I think that's why their relationship and their sort of will they, won't they feeling translates so well, because cinematic.
Well,
so
I
true.
think one of the things that does that is there's a lot of Hitchcock references in this episode throughout, and I think that gives it this cinematic evidence feel. If you look at the way the title card is rendered, very Hitchcock, with this kind of broken up, reminds me of how they do the Psycho title card. There's this fight on the Statue of Liberty, in which Hitchcock has a fight on the Statue of Liberty in Sabotage. When Count Vertigo falls, it's got a Vertigo feeling of the movie Vertigo, and his name is Vertigo. And then also the overall, she's not the icy blonde, but Talia has that kind of femme fatale feel of a Hitchcock or another 40s or 50s kind of femme fatale feeling throughout, with the Veronica Lake hair that's kind of covering half of her face the entire one. So all those kind of references, and that's what I was kind of mentioning before too. It's so cool that these creators, obviously they grew up with these kind of movies, and they're putting this into this for a generation of kids that had never seen this before. And I think, I would imagine for myself, who then became enamored with Hitchcock, and I know yourself too, Guido, big Hitchcock fan and like big fan of movies from this era. I bet like this show put those seeds, gave you that language to understand those movies before you maybe then saw some of those movies.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching Hitchcock young, so I don't know which order it went in, but this, I definitely agree. There's connections to that classic cinema, which is part of why it has the cinematic feel. And obviously it's also doing lots of noir and evoking lots of noir, which is something actually I wasn't into a lot as a younger movie viewer, but now I'm more into. And you're right, like the femme fatale Veronica Lake aspect is there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, great, this is one of the Count Vertigo episodes. I remember this, his appearances on this so well, but this is his only appearance on the show. I think it was just his look and feel was so kind of iconic in my brain that I was thinking, oh, he was reoccurring, but this is his only appearance. And
I want to say that's true for like Harley is not in that many episodes. Of course, the show is famous because it created Harley and introduced Harley. But I want to say she's actually not in that many episodes. But of course, the few episodes she's in are iconic, like beyond iconic.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think a lot of the episodes do that. They play tricks on you. You feel like you've seen this story a lot, but they're just so good that. Yeah.
I think that's true of like Batman 66 too, where someone like Egghead only has a couple of appearances, but we think of him as super iconic. And actually that makes me think of like the last thing I wanted to bring up, which was like the 66 show, which had all these great guest stars. And I just wanted to talk a second about like the great voice cast on this episode.
Yeah.
And because what's cool is they didn't go like the Chris Pratt Mario route. Let's just get the biggest name and put him as this character, even though it's not a great fit. But they didn't go like let's just get animation people either. They got these really cool kind of left field actors. So we've got David Warner as Ra's al Ghul, and David Warner is in Titanic and The Omen, and like has one of the best filmographies of all time. One of my favorite actors. Michael York from Cabaret and the Austin Powers movies as Count Vertigo. And then we have Supergirl herself, Helen Slater, playing very against type as Talia too.
Yeah, and Warner DC and Warner always like to keep it in the family. So yeah, you can see Helen as good casting example of that.
Totally. Yeah. And then I'm sure we'll talk more about Kevin Conroy throughout this episode, but I think just as iconic as he is as Batman is Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. as Alfred. I think he just strikes that perfect tone. He gives us so much of the comedy in this episode and throughout the series, these kind of very wry remarks. And I think you can totally see how Tom Hollander on the Harley Quinn show is also referencing Ephraim Zimbalist Jr.'s portrayal on this. And I was just looking it up, and a fun fact, Ephraim and Kevin Conroy have the same birthday.
Wow.
Born many years apart, but they were born on the same day. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, let's talk. I mean, we'll talk about Kevin's bio more later, but let's talk about his performance here as Batman. Why is it perfect? So it is perfect. I'm going to state that as a fact.
Yeah.
But why?
Yeah.
I think I'm going to paraphrase something I saw on Twitter. The reason why we don't see tweets saying, oh, we'll never hear Kevin Conroy's voice again is because we'll always hear it when we're reading a Batman story.
That's so true. That is very true. Yeah.
I think the line between his Bruce and his Batman is a lot thinner. And because we've seen people like Christian Bale, who does I'm going to play Bruce, very different than I playing Batman. But yeah, I think Kevin is able to kind of do them both similarly, and it works because they are the same person. Maybe he doesn't have to put on that persona as much. And there's also, though, that lightness of it you don't get from, like, Robert Pattinson, who's very dark and serious the entire time. You do get that swashbuckling feel.
Well, I don't think this is true for Michael Keaton. I actually think Michael Keaton might be closer to the Kevin Conroy version, but definitely the Christian Bale and the Robert Pattinson version. I think what I imagine my challenge with both of them is it feels like you would tire your voice out doing what either of them are doing. They're both so affected when they're doing Batman that you're like, there's no way you could do that all the time. Like, it just wouldn't work. And Kevin Conroy, and perhaps Michael Keaton, doesn't do that. Like Kevin Conroy, you can imagine talking sort of like, yeah, I'm feeling really intense right now, so I'm going to talk like this, versus, oh, I'm at a party and I'm going to talk like this, right? Like, I can modulate my voice like that. We all do in different settings. But the way that Christian Bale and Robert Pattinson modulate their voice just feels so forced and so intense that you're like, you can't sustain that. Get out of here. So, yeah, I think some of it might be that subtlety, I guess, that Kevin Conroy is using really adds to it and makes it stick. And I guess he also just has a great voice. Yeah. I don't know.
He does.
I don't know how else to explain it.
Yeah. I think it's also just freed just like listening to his voice, and it goes so well with the animation too. So it's just a perfect combination.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because we were saying we'll hear his voice even when we're then reading the comics. And in fact, our next thing we're going to talk about is the Batman the Animated Series comic, and that is Batman Adventures, Volume Number 1, Issue Number 29, from February 1995, so about 3 years after our episode, and this issue is entitled Demon Seed.
This is written by Kelly Puckett, penciled by Dev Madan, inked by Rich Burchett, colored by Rick Taylor, lettered by Comicraft Richard Starkings, edited by Scott Peterson, Darren Vincenzo. So the Batman Adventures comics are based on the TV show. They don't retell those stories, though. They're telling original stories with the same art style, the same story structure. So you'll notice that there's 3 act breaks, like the commercials would present in the episode, and a very self-contained episodic feel. I've never seen a great analysis. Maybe there is one, but I've never seen if they're canonical or not. I think they kind of can be canonical to the world of Batman the Animated Series because they're very contained and they reset the status quo just like the series does. So they probably could be canonical, but I don't know that for a fact. And like the series itself, the volumes of Batman Adventures morphed. So when they introduced Robin and became Batman and Robin, then the comic series did that. And of course, Batman Adventures Volume 1 has the special issue called Mad Love. It's a non-numbered special, which is the first Harley appearance in comics. So that's why Batman Adventures is often paid attention to, because that issue is, of course, incredibly valuable and famous for that reason. But why this issue of Batman Adventures, Ethan?
Chose this one because I basically feel that it is the same as the episode, minus Count Vertigo. Minus Count Vertigo.
Yeah.
And it's even more similar to the other issue we're going to cover, because it still mirrors the relationship between Talia and Batman, which I feel so weird saying Talia and Batman, and then we're going to get to the next issue. But it's very... Why these were all so perfect is because even the Dark Claw issue that we're going to cover, it feels more Batman than it feels Wolverine.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
And in both of in both this issue and the episode, we have Ra's al Ghul in the issue or episode, but he's kind of haunting the the edges of it, and he really only makes an appearance in both at the very end, which I think it fits because of all the Batman villains, he's the one that's kind of like the Blofeld mastermind kind of one, and he wouldn't necessarily be down in the nitty gritty action in the way that the Joker even would be, right? So it kind of works that he's this kind of grand criminal, not even criminal, he's like, terrorist mastermind, really.
Yeah, he's a presence. This issue, Rob, you probably never read Batman Adventures. Ethan, maybe you haven't either, but had either of you read this title?
I had not.
This comic, not this issue, but just the comic Batman Adventures?
I had a couple. Yeah, no, I did have a couple random ones, but I probably bought them based on whatever villain was in it. So so that's it. I probably didn't have this one because Roz and Talia were never really at the top of my villain list.
I think it does a perfect job capturing the show. I think you feel like you're looking at the storyboards for an episode. It, in part, also like the breakdowns are meant to look like the show, so it's not even just the art, but it really does feel like storyboards. It's a very cool thing that they did here. Again, comparing it to there was the X-Men Adventures. Now that was more an adaptation of the stories, and it wasn't meant to look or read like the TV show. I think to its detriment. I'm not a huge fan of that series. This, I think, is such a perfect extension. If you're a fan of the show, reading this comic gives you that same exact experience. You almost just want this issue to be turned into an episode because it easily could be. So what makes me think of all that is a lot, but like the Talia Bruce chemistry is there on the panel. Like the will they, won't they thing that's happening on there is really fun. And then Rob, in terms of what you're saying with the homages to other things, I love the one time they go to a wedding venue. On this case, they go to the Happy Fate wedding parlor. And it's just fun because there's like this slimy guy who's sitting at the desk at the wedding parlor and says we're closed for the season. And it just cuts to Talia holding a gun at him saying season's over. And Batman's like in the back beating someone up. So it's like it's so fun to see them on a case together in this issue. And I love it.
Similar to...
Yeah, well, I think... No, go ahead.
Similar to how they were on a case together in the episode.
Yeah. Yeah, I think these Roz and the Al Ghul family brings out the detective in Batman, and Roz even just calls him detective the entire time too. And we definitely get this kind of classic, going back to the femme fatale 40s film noir kind of thing. Definitely get that vibe here, and that kind of detective story. And even though it's kind of inevitable, you kind of know where it's going to be going in this. It's clearly, for a younger audience, but it still has that strong structure there. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, let us leave the world of Batman the Animated Series, unfortunately, but maybe fortunately, because we are entering a little-known universe known as the Amalgamverse.
I am your guide through these vast new realities. Follow me and ponder the question, what if?
So today on Exploring Multiversity, we are asking the question, what if Kevin Conroy, the best Batman there is, was amalgamated with Wolverine in an animated series? And this issue is Dark Claw Adventures, issue number 1 from June 1997, entitled Face to Face.
And this is written and penciled by Ty Templeton, inked by Rick Burchett, colored by Linda Medley, lettered by Tim Harkins, and edited by Scott Peterson and Darren Vincenzo. And there's a special thanks to Dan Slott on this issue. And coincidentally, I just heard an interview with Tom Brevoort, and I think he mentioned Dan Slott came up with the racial apocalypse concept, which is why he gets a special thanks in this issue. So this is, again, Earth 9602, the Amalgam Universe, kind of, I guess. Yep. And it occurred This was actually during volume 2 of Batman Adventures, which was when they have Robin in the series at that point. And like all of the Amalgam titles did, they froze Batman Adventures for a month. It didn't come out. And instead, this issue came out as part of Wave 2 of Amalgam. So, wow, there's a lot to say about this issue. It is filled with Easter eggs, and I want to spend a lot of time on Easter eggs. But I guess let's start with some general impressions. So, Ethan, what did you think? Obviously, you'd been familiar with this. What do you think of this issue?
I love it. I wish it actually was an animated series.
Or, agreed.
Or, you want to get real technical, as they say in the letters column, animated show.
Yes. I know. I love the mashups in the letters page. There's a few I will note in this conversation because they're great. And they're on the Fox Brothers network, too. I love that. Yeah, very clever. I agree. Or if it wasn't going to be a series, I wish it was like Batman Adventures. Like it was an ongoing comics made to be like the TV show.
At least that, yeah. Because we'll get to them. But I need to see more of those villains.
Oh my gosh. I know.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I took note of all of those names that they created. Rob, what did you think?
I mean...
Maybe I had read this issue, but...
I had read this definitely probably in 1997. And I think I loved it so much it actually made me a little depressed that this is not an actual ongoing thing as well. I don't even need the animated TV series. I just need the comic. And I know we've talked about in our past episodes that people can go back and listen to, but of all of the Amalgam characters, this one seems like the most no-brainer that if these two companies got together and said, okay, we're just going to make one Amalgam character, and it's going to be Dark Claw, and he's going to have an ongoing comic book series, and we're going to share the profits. I mean, like, this, two super popular characters in Wolverine and Batman, they go together so perfectly well. They could totally replicate this style, because nostalgia is also in all the people who grew up with this show, like we talked about at the beginning, are now, would be getting back into it. It seems like a no-brainer, and it's kind of sad to me that they can't get their stuff together and kind of do that.
Well, and we haven't done the core universe Dark Claw issue yet, which we will at some point. But yeah, I think Ethan might agree with you. Ethan's wearing a shirt that says just that today. Dark Claw is greater than Batman plus Wolverine. So, yeah, I think to start off with some of the Easter eggs. What's cool is I'm not the biggest Batman fan, so I actually had to look some of these Easter eggs up. But there are so many in there from both Wolverine and Batman. Ty Templeton, who was writing the Batman Adventure series at this point, he does such a good job of pulling pieces of both of them in. And I knew all the Wolverine references, but like, for example, his code name is Patch Malone. Of course, Wolverine goes by Patch for a while. I looked it up, and Batman went by Matches Malone when he would pretend to be a criminal. So you've got Patch Malone there. And then I love at the end of the issue, they're previewing the next issue, which of course doesn't exist, sadly, that they're going to have the Secret of the Waiting Phoenix saga. And that's a combination of a famous Neil Adams Batman story, The Secret of the Waiting Graves, I think. And then, of course, the Phoenix saga. So, like, they just do this. They have so much fun with pulling pieces of both of them in as great little nods to each world. And I like that a lot.
We definitely should get through the pantheon of villains that I know Ethan probably can tell us so much about. But our aside from Dark Claw himself, we've got Sparrow here, who is Jubilee and Robin, which is just the perfect combination because
who's singing Dark Claw
I know
at one point in the on panel, which is
not
great.
Enough Nas, actually. No.
I know it's true. It's a slightly revised version of the. They didn't want to get in trouble.
What a perfect combination in terms of their personalities. The yellow in Robin's cape, the yellow in her coat, and then we know from one of the past amalgams that we covered that they actually had a short-lived romance as well. So even on that makes it great that these kind of characters are combined.
Well, I'd say that adds an element of weirdness to it.
I guess that's also true.
We love each other so much, let's just combine.
Who are you to judge? But yes. And then we get our two villains. Well, one's only shown in flashback, but we get Ra's Apocalypse, which also makes perfect sense because both characters are old and can rejuvenate and have their own kind of versions of the Lazarus Pit, and also
have sort of a survival of the fittest mentality. Their moral code. They're not there to be evil. They're there to have the strong conquer the earth.
Yeah, restart humanity or mutantdom there, and then our main. Our second biggest character here, which is Talia al Ghul and Lady
Talia.
Lady Talia here.
Lady Deathstrike.
Yes, Lady Talia.
And Talia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is just so great because they're both, not only the romantic connection to the protagonist, but also they are both ninjas as well, so you get that great connection. It really is the app. I was thinking, who are they going to mash her? I didn't remember this. Who are they going to mash her up with? And then as soon as I saw it was like, oh my gosh, of course, it's the absolute perfect combination.
It is. And yeah, I think you're right, because both characters, Lady Deathstrike and Talia, have these romances with Batman and Wolverine. It just reinforces how much this makes sense. And then the fact that she kills him at the end, or thinks she kills him at the end, tries to kill him at the end, which you can totally see Talia or Deathstrike doing, but then she's so upset about that, but luckily his healing factor means he's not dead, and they sort of close in their loving embrace while Darkclaw was potentially dying, and that feels like it would work in either universe. That's why this story is so cool, because it's one of the rare amalgams, I think, where the same story could work for either core character. And that's really cool.
Totally. Should we go through the our other briefly seen amalgam characters?
Yeah.
So
one that we've already met, Green Goblin or Two-Faced Goblin, which I actually referenced in our Speed Demon episode. This is the scene, this is the panel, where you see him on the giant coin.
Yes, Harvey
but they
Osborn.
call him Two-Faced Goblin instead of just Green Goblin like they do in Speed Demon. Another villain who we will meet later down the road when we do the other Darkclaw issue, which, by the way, I have 2 copies of that. One is signed by Larry Hama, or Hama, however you pronounce his name, and the other is signed by Jim Balin. And the reason why I have 2 of them is because I got the Jim Balin one later on as a Christmas present.
Well, you can't have too
many.
Knowing you and your love of these, you can't have too many.
Amen. So the one that we meet is Hyena, who is Sabretooth and the Joker, which is also a pretty perfect one. In theory,
totally.
We see Spiral Harley.
Yeah, which is a very strange one. I really want to know more about Spiral Harley. Also, I love in the letters page, they talk about the Darkclaw Else What If series action figures that are coming out. And I love that they put, which for those of us who were collecting action figures back in the day, this was always so true. The female figures were like 1 to 10 in a case. So April O'Neil was really hard to get, and Tila was really hard to get, and all those characters. And so I love that they put that in here. They say that Spiral Harley is coming, but there's only 1 Harley per 10 dozen Darkclaws, so keep your eyes peeled. We
also have Blood Crow, who is another example of amalgam double dipping, because we could have easily... We're revisiting Two-Faced Goblin. Why couldn't we have revisited Scarecrow, who's Ghost Rider Scarecrow and Batman Scarecrow? But instead, this version is Batman Scarecrow and Wolverine's vampire villain Bloodscream.
Bloodscream.
Yeah, Bloodscream. And then there's Cyber Croc, who's
who's the cyber in
Killer
Cyber
Croc.
Croc?
Killer Croc.
Oh, and Cyber.
Cyber.
Oh, Cyber's the Wolverine, the guy with the
Just-
metal
yeah.
arm. Yeah,
Oh, yes,
Cyber.
yes.
And
Oh,
Killer
that's right.
Croc. And then my
I didn't
personal
think of-
favorite, aside from Two-Face Goblin, of course, my favorite, just because it's just such a top-tier name, Omega Beast. Who's Omega
the
Red
Omega Beast.
and KG Beast.
Oh, I don't even know who KG
KG
Beast
Beast?
is.
Oh yeah, KG
Just
Beast.
picture Russian Bane before Bane. That's basically who KG Beast is.
Yeah.
Oh.
And that it's such a great lineup, and we see it when Darkclaw is fighting in like the Danger Room
Yeah.
equivalent
The
here.
Danger
He's
Cave.
fighting robots
Yeah.
of it.
My my favorite other element of the cave is that the giant coin that Batman always has in the cave is a Canadian penny.
It's a Canadian nickel.
Canadian, yeah.
Yeah.
I laughed out loud when I did see that it was Canadian here. Yeah.
It does make me wonder, how did that come to be in this universe? And to dig it deeper, was there also a retcon in the Amalgam universe? Because a lot of people think, because this is the retcon, that Two-Face is responsible for the giant coin. Originally, he was not. There was an old villain called the Penny Plunderer, whose whole thing was
Wow.
pennies. And that's why he's got a giant penny. But they've like retconned that to be about Two-Face, because Two-Face is the more popular villain that has a coin motif.
Wait, more popular than Penny Plunderer?
Yeah. Well, and I guess this Canadian version of the villain in this retcon is the nickel plunderer.
Yeah.
And I love that it has like a little woodchuck on it, which I'm assuming is probably what the Canadian nickel had on it at the
Yeah.
time. They were probably drawing it for real there, which is fun.
Well, and maybe before we move on to, or before you have some of your other questions, I'm curious. We were talking about Kevin Conroy, obviously super iconic voice, and we were saying you can't help but read Batman and read him. But I would say the same thing about Cal Dodd, who did Wolverine on that X-Men the Animated Series. So my question to the two of you would be, like, do you hear Kevin's voice or do you hear Cal's voice when you're reading Darkclaw?
I think with Darkclaw, it alternates. It either alternates, or in my case, since I wasn't so familiar with the Wolverine voice, Kevin's voice just didn't play. And it just went to a default voice for Wolverine. Because even though his story is more Batman, his look is more Wolverine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I'd want both in my Amalgam universe. So Cal Dodd does the voice when he's in costume, and Kevin Conroy does the voice when he's out of costume.
Nice.
That's
So,
great. Yeah.
Cal Conroy.
problem solved. Yeah, so it's a great fun issue. I think we mentioned all the Easter eggs that are in the letters page too. Yeah, Darkclaw, the animated show on Fox Brothers Network every day at 4:00. And then they reference, as they do in everything else, like past issues and future issues of it. They talk about the 10 Knights of Omega storyline. Earlier in the issue, there's the editorial comment too, referencing that the flashback about Ra's al Apocalypse happened in the TV episode Legacy of Apocalypse. So they're just having so much fun with these mashups. I love it. They even then switched the names, which it took me a moment. I was like, oh, wait a second. They have them as Bruce Dinny and Paul Tim are the co-creators of the show. So they just take the two people who did create the Batman anime series and swap their names. So yeah, so much fun to be had in this issue. I wish it went on.
Mm-hmm. And before we go on to the next segment, Guido, also you wore the shirt Ethan's wearing at New York Comic Con, and you even were able to speak to famous people. You introduce famous comic book writers to Amalgam.
Yes, that is true. We recapped that on our Comic-Con episode. Jonathan Hickman had not known about the Amalgam Universe, but the editor of Three Moons, Three Worlds commented and liked that shirt that I had, that we had made and shared with Ethan. And yeah, then we got to tell Jonathan Hickman all about the Amalgam Universe.
So if the Amalgam Universe comes back, I think Guido and this podcast have had a hand in it. Just, you're hearing it first right here.
Yes. If only.
Mm-hmm. Well, let us move into the future and start to ponder some possibilities.
Will the future you describe be averted, averted?
So, Guido, what are we talking about for our pondering possibilities?
So, with Amalgam, as we've covered on past episodes, it's really hard to find something after that has a relationship to the Amalgam, because they pretty much do a hard stop. Although recently the Death of Spider-Verse storyline has that awesome Spider-Boy broken arm in panel. So there's little tiny Easter eggs like that. But because we wanted this episode and Ethan had proposed it as a tribute to Kevin Conroy, I thought, well, let's read the story that he wrote. It's the first and only comic that he wrote. It came out just months ago for DC Pride 2022, in which he tells his autobiographical story of his career and getting the part in Batman and what it meant to him and why playing this character for 3 decades was really important in his personal narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so this is DC Pride 2022, issue number 1, from June 2022, and this story is entitled Kevin Conroy Finding Batman.
And it's written by Kevin Conroy with inks, pencils, and colors by Jay Bone, lettered by Aditya Bidikar, and edited by Jessica Chen. From that anthology, and it's a just beautiful story. It's hard. It's going to be hard not to cry about this, because it's hard to read it and not cry. It actually has an advisory before it starts in the book saying that while the rest of the issue is meant to be a celebration and how important it is, that this story is more about the challenges and the difficulty, and it includes slurs, and that they want Pride to be a beautiful event, but not despite the dark times in our personal histories, but because of them. And I love this intro, and because of the strength we found on the other side of those moments. And so we present to you the story with all of Mr. Conroy's experiences and language intact. So I really appreciate that advisory, and it is, I don't know where to go with it.
Yeah.
Well, I
guess we could summarize it before our impressions. Sure. So Kevin Conroy starts as an actor. He has a rather challenging childhood. His father kills himself. He discovers the body, and he becomes an actor at Juilliard, and then goes on and is closeted. He actually only comes out in 2016, so he's closeted for most of his life, but he is not closeted in his personal life, and so he recounts getting a few jobs and difficulty, an actor who calls him a slur, and how that makes him feel, and how he didn't get a role that he was really close to getting that would have been a big deal, because the network found out about his personal life, found out he was gay, and the agent is angry at him. And then the challenges with a mentally ill brother and navigating that and how to support that. The challenges, of course, of being gay and losing so many friends and coworkers to AIDS in the 80s. And then getting the call and going into the audition for Batman, and the way that Batman wearing a mask and having this different persona was something he could relate to on so many levels. And that's how he found his way into the character that he played for 30 years. and it's very powerful. So, what did you all think?
Powerful is the key word. Powerful is definitely the key word. One observation art-wise I think is very interesting, and it might be just a coincidence, especially with the name. But Dan Parent of Archie Comics did a Kevin Keller series called Life with Kevin. And it centers around Kevin Keller, and it's the exact same color scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's all black and white lines with just some blue shading. That's the look of this story for those who haven't seen it.
And yeah, even I think it was a really smart choice art-wise to keep it not just make it a photorealism of Kevin Conroy the actor either, because that could maybe take you out of it, and actually embrace this more more sketchy almost quality to the art too, because it allows you to actually have to listen to the story, take in the story more, I think, which works really well.
And the thing that really, I don't know if it started it, I think this exists in a lot of these indie comics, but Fun Home is the most famous example. That is the same. It's black and white with blue and gray shading, and that's it. And Fun Home, of course, being Alison Bechdel's also really tragic and touching and acclaimed autobiographical story, also including family with mental illness and being queer and coming out. So there's something maybe about the influence of Fun Home on both of these projects.
Yeah. And I was thinking, reading this now, I mean, it certainly has so much more weight in his passing, and thinking also he was probably ill when he was doing this too. And the idea of it kind of him taking this moment to look back on his life at that time and kind of recount it, which I think is a lot of times that we're often doing when, we've had family members who have been, very, very sick, or people have been sick themselves. So it's great that DC also gave him this opportunity to kind of to reflect on this while he had that time.
Yeah, it was. As soon as this came out, I said to Rob, okay, we need to go find Kevin at a con and get him to sign this issue. And we did not have that opportunity. And actually, I keep watching to see, it doesn't look like anyone had that opportunity. He did make some con appearances over the summer, but maybe people didn't bring this issue. I haven't seen this issue signed by him anywhere. And it is just amazing that he got to tell this story. The other thing that I think affects me so much about it is there's something that can't be removed from it about the presence of Batman in our world. Batman is one of the three most famous comic book characters in the world. We can say comfortably. And he's adopted by so many people, men in particular, as this, hard, kick-ass representation of a particular masculinity. Oftentimes, I'd say in a problematic way, Batman is seen as like this, take no BS, like just be a man and blah, blah, blah. And so to have someone who for 30 years was playing this character in an iconic way that I don't think anyone would dispute, even if he's not your Batman. I think no one would dispute Kevin Conroy did an amazing job as Batman, and talk about the way that he found himself into that character is through his queer identity and through his family's mental health and trauma inflicted upon him. I just find that so powerful. Like, I want everyone who likes Batman to read this story to reconsider who Batman is and what Batman can mean and stand for. He's not about violently disposing of criminals. He's, something else.
Exactly.
Yeah. And even looking back onto, the heterosexual relationship he has with Talia and the other issues that we read, I mean, there is always, there's always this conflict that is in Batman in wanting to have this normal life where he can have this relationship, but he can't have this relationship in this part in those comics because the person he's in a relationship with is maybe also a villain and has these problems. And then, you can certainly see that, in through the queer lens as well, as wanting to have these relationships, but not being able to, because of these stigmas, or not wanting to come out, or being out in your private life, but not being out in your public life, which you can also see with like Talia, right? Like he's out as Batman to her, but he's not out to the world in that way. And, I mean, there could be even reflections there as well.
The other connection that I think is in line with that, and I'm just realizing visually as I'm looking at these pages, is at the end of the Dark Claw Adventures, when Talia is holding him, and he was dying but is going to live. He says, I would have killed the person who killed my parents too. So they find this way of identifying with each other because of that trauma. And that's also how Kevin's story closes, is that he shows himself like holding his brother, holding his father, holding his friend who died of AIDS, and then, likens that obviously to Bruce holding his parents in the alley, like this way that this trauma and holding this person that mattered to you and losing them, it shapes who you are. And so it's interesting. That's another sort of echo I hadn't seen between Talia and Bruce's relationship and what Kevin's doing with Batman's relationship to his life. Yeah. It's an amazing story that everyone should read. I think DC made it available freely after Kevin's passing. I don't know if that's still true or how to access it, but it's well worth tracking down for people to learn about this incredible person's story. And
And DC in general, I mean, you and I have talked about this, Guido, but they've done some great stuff with these Pride issues, have been really chock full of great stories. And I think also their queer representation on screen as well, whether it's, Batwoman in the TV show or Larry Traynor, Negative Man on Doom Patrol. They're doing some really great representation.
Harley Quinn.
Harley Quinn, the animated series. Totally.
I love that series so much.
Yeah. And finding all different levels within like what, we were talking about here, or like what they're saying with their editor's note. They're finding the challenges, the struggles and the joy in that in that experience. So they're really showing, I think, the full gamut there.
Yeah. So, this has been a good tribute to Kevin Conroy and a great opportunity to see Dark Claw Adventures, something we want more of. And thank you, Ethan, for bringing this to us.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
Of course. And thank you, dear watchers, for listening. I've been Guido.
And I have been Rob. And Ethan, tell people where they can find you and what you're up to in, the many different shifting social media spaces these days.
I am still mostly on Twitter at MakeMineMalcolm. Anything else, you can find me. I'm most likely Make Mine Amalgam. I'm make_mine_amalgam on Instagram. And then I'm pretty much Make Mine Amalgam on everything else. Like Hive, Tumblr, whatever. And all that other stuff, I'll post a couple of action figure pics here and there. I'll retweet or reblog or whatever you call it, a couple of Josie pictures here and there. But other than that, I am mostly on Twitter until it goes kaput. Hopefully it doesn't.
Do you have a custom Dark Claw?
I don't.
Oh.
But this morning I was posting about this Amazon 5-pack that has a shirtless Wolverine.
Oh, yeah, and Callisto and Omega Red.
Yeah,
I have
Cyber. That. 2 of them were amalgamated. And then we got... and then Mastermind who also he is amalgamated in one of the X Patrol books. I think he's Mr. Mastermind. He's Mr. Mind,
right?
From
Mr.
Captain
Mind
Marvel,
and Mastermind, yeah.
and he's Mastermind. And then, so I was saying, like, hey, someone should make me a custom cloth, like, outfit for this Wolverine to make him into, like, an unmasked Darkclaw.
Yeah.
It's the perfect.
All right,
format.
The holidays are coming.
I know. Someone should do that for you. I agree. I wish I could sew or mold with putty or something so I could make some. But
well, I need that and I need the set. So.
All right, well, our reading list for today and links to those other episodes to check out when Ethan's joined us and the Amalgam comics we've covered are in the show notes. You can follow us on all social media at Dear Watchers.
Don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back soon with another trip through the multiverse.
In the meantime, in the words of Uatu, keep pondering the possibilities.